It's time again for Talking Trade, sponsored by MMAC's World Trade Association and Michael Best Strategies.
Welcome to Talking Trade. I'm Sandi Seigel, president of ME Day.
And I'm Ken Wasylik, Managing Director of EM Wasylik & Associates, an international business development company. Well, we're very pleased today that we have Mickeala Carter from FTI Consulting. Mickeala has a wealth of experience. She's a senior director in the strategic communications segment of FTI, and she's a member of the government affairs practice and brings a wealth of experience and information and insight into how Congress and the administration's, the executive branch works. So thank you, Mickeala, to joining us here on Talking Trade today.
Thank you, Sandi and Ken. I'm so honored to be here with the both of you today and excited to talk a bit about agriculture and trade.
Wow, agriculture, that's a big sector in every country, especially here in the United States and here in the Midwest. Ag is a substantial revenue, and it's really dear to everyone because we are all consumers of agricultural products here. So can you give us an overview of the impact of the ag sector, not just here in the US, but globally? And then how important is a healthy ag industry mean to all of us as consumers, and also the farmers and all the producers and the food processors along the entire route?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll start out with a number from 2023. So according to the Department of Agriculture's Economic Research Service, agricultural exports reached about $174 billion. And that's not an insignificant amount. However, due to things like inflation, competition, that number was actually about 11% down from 2022. So I'm going to use the 2022 numbers to drive my big point home here. So in calendar year 2022, there were about $197.4 billion of agricultural exports. And that helped to produce an additional $214.6 billion in economic activity for a total economic output of about $412 billion. So again, not an insignificant number. And when you're thinking about agricultural exports and what that means for our farmers here, a lot of that now is due to US ag output growing faster than domestic demand for a lot of products. And some of those products include those of importance to Wisconsin's, like dairy products, meats, vegetables, and can be contributed to just the shifting landscape around the world. So we're having higher populations. You have higher incomes in other countries that maybe didn't exist before. I personally think the internet has a lot to do with it. People are learning a bit more
Sure.
about what happens, in other countries, what we eat here in the US. They're becoming interested. There's a demand for it. And with those exports come business activity and jobs. I think that those 2022 numbers supported over 6,000 US jobs throughout the economy. So, a lot of folks don't necessarily think about agriculture when they think about big numbers and what drives the economy, but it's no small feat in ensuring that our economy is continuing to grow. And ag imports also play a big part in that. Those are steadily growing. Americans, we want our strawberries year round. We want our pineapples year round. And that means having to work alongside other countries to ensure that we're getting those imports at a steady rate.
Absolutely. Well, and you mentioned it's so significant in exports in the Midwest and certainly in Wisconsin. And you touched on the cultural piece and the changing landscape and opportunities. And I just attended a conference talking about cheese and how cheese is so much more, popular worldwide, and younger generations abroad, and how that's changing the landscape. But also, so much of this is driven, the ability to reach some of these markets for Wisconsin is driven by some of the trade regulations and the trade agreements we have, and agriculture is often a touchy issue, if you will. And I know the little bit that I've been reading on the agriculture sector, Neither of the candidates are necessarily promoting policy that seem to benefit agriculture economically, and obviously the economy is also a big focus for everybody with the upcoming election, based on our filming date here today. So talk about that in a broad perspective. What do you see as the current trends in the agricultural trade internationally, and what the issues are in that sector, and what would you predict is lying ahead?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying, to your point of, neither candidate really coming strongly in talking about this. I feel like they're so scared to, because unless you're in ag, I think a lot of people just do not understand it, and they're just waiting for their ag experts to come out and talk about it. But I will say that one of the things that kind of dates back to, I'll say 2018, 2019, we started to see a bit of a decline in US ag exports. And that was due to retaliatory tariffs from other countries. So I think China, EU, Mexico, and Canada, and that was due to tariffs that were being put on them by us. And so today we're looking at the bulk of those tariffs, which have been removed. And I think that we're seeing those numbers climbing back up steadily, and a concentrated effort from the agricultural community. I won't even just say from this particular administration, but I think folks across agriculture who are really garnering relationships with other countries to talk about trade. One of the benefits that I had of being at USDA was we did a trade mission to East Africa. We did one to the UK, and it was a bipartisan group of folks just there to talk about how can we get our products into your country. So I think we're seeing more and more of that. For example, I was reading that just last year, cranberries, which I know are very important for Wisconsin, the exports have shot up. And Colombia was the country, particularly, that had been getting more and more cranberries, and that was due to them implementing it to different dishes, because they were getting more top chefs into Colombia because they're seeing their tourism go up, and people wanting to experience different types of cuisines. And I think that as tourism rises in other countries that maybe perhaps in the past just weren't known for their tourism, we'll see more of this. So we'll see more interest in exotic or native fruits that are native to America being exported out to other countries. And hopefully that means that for our farmers, more business, right? And more business means a better economy, and it means a better agricultural industry.
I love these little anecdotal stories that
Right.
just make the world smaller and smaller, and and it's all about food at the end of the day. And talking about food, there was an impact on pricing and so forth. Again, another major focus for us here in the US and through the election. The Ukraine-Russia war had an impact on the whole food supply chain, and some of the grain and things that came out of that area and so forth. Can you talk about that a little bit, and how we were impacted, food, the supply chain, the industry as a whole, and where we are now in navigating that?
Definitely. So as most folks know, Russia invaded Ukraine in, I believe it was February. I know it was 2022, but February of that year. And what it did was exacerbate already high food and fertilizer prices. Those prices had increased during the COVID-19 pandemic. So the timing wasn't necessarily great as far as pricing went. And in that aftermath, we saw a lot of trade restrictions, bans, quotas, duties on fertilizer, and that impacted fertilizer trade and ag production, particularly for staple grains. And for a little bit of further background, fertilizer is a key input in food production, so especially for staple grains. So rising prices will have a trickle-down effect on the food supply, because if farmers are having to limit their use of fertilizer due to higher costs, their yields could and potentially will decline. So as a result of that, we did see the Department of Agriculture come out with a program to encourage more domestic fertilizer production here at home. And as a result, we have seen those numbers start to climb back up a bit. Of course, the trade aspect of it, I think, is just going to take time. Although we've seen, that war kind of still going on technically, but we've seen a lot of the impacts of it start to fade. Not as many huge I'm trying to think of the right word to say here. I don't want to
I feel
diminish
like we've
anything that's
adjusted a
happening
little
there.
bit.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
but we've adjusted a bit.
Yeah.
But I think it will just be like a steady climb back up to where we have been. But I do think that that domestic production of fertilizer it's kind of been our saving grace. And while we still are seeing pretty low yields this year, and again, that's due to things I mentioned earlier, like inflation, like competition. I think that regardless of who is taking the oath of office on January 20th, that we'll start to see a climb up, and hopefully the farm bill will have a bit to do with that too.
Good
Well,
point.
let's just talk about the farm bill. I mean, there's a major farm bill, what, every 5 years, I
5
think,
years, yeah.
every 5 years, and each administration, and of course, a presidential term is 4 years. So Congress is very involved in this, and farmers across the entire United States participate in this farm bill, and it's really important. And I know a lot of the exports promotional programs like export. The branding program comes out of the farm bill as well as the appropriations for USDA. What's in store for us on the next farm bill?
So that is the question that everyone is asking right now, Ken.
Well, good. So are we.
Exactly. So for background, our last farm bill that was passed was back in 2018, and that was signed into law under then President Donald Trump. And as you mentioned, it is passed every 5 years, or at least supposed to pass every 5 years. So the re-up of this particular farm bill should have been last year in 2023, but an extension was requested for a year. And so that year was up in September. And now we have some folks in Congress hoping that it can be done during the lame duck session, and you have other folks who are holding out. And a lot of it is due to the same age-old fights that happen during every farm bill. So in addition to some of the programs that you mentioned that are authorized and mandated through the farm bill, one of the big and most expensive portions of the farm bill is the SNAP program, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, known to most folks as food stamps. So that generally causes a fight between parties on how much money should be spent for that. And then another fight that usually happens are kind of regional fights. If you have a Wisconsin member, of course, they're going to be pushing for programs that best benefit dairy farmers, or, those that have specialty crops like cranberries. But if you're having, let's say someone from Minnesota, they're going to be fighting for sugar beet growers. And, so just different regions have different top priorities. And sometimes that can come to rear its ugly head when it comes to making negotiations. And then there are lots of other programs that are mandated through the Farm Bill, those that impact crop insurance and conservation practices. And it also provides support for major commodities while authorizing disaster assistance for those same commodities. So to go back to the first question, what's in store? I think that everyone is hopeful that we can pass a farm bill by the end of this Congress. But in the unfortunate event that it does not happen, we will be going into a new Congress in January. So that will mean having to introduce a brand new bill and kind of start all over from scratch. Yeah.
Yeah, start all over.
So thank you for that. That's interesting insight. I'm afraid we've run out of time today. Before we close, I want to make a plug for you and to the listeners to hear a lot more on insight on trade policy from both you, Mickeala, and some of your colleagues at FTI. You are sponsoring and participating in an upcoming MITA event, Madison Trade, on November 12th, and this particular program is at WCTC in Pewaukee. So a shout out to all our listeners. It sounds like it'll be a terrific program. Thank you for joining us, Mickeala Carter, and giving us your insight on ag in
Thank
Wisconsin.
you, Sandy, and
Yeah.
thank you, Ken.
Thanks,
And I'm
Mickeala.
excited to go to Wisconsin, my first time there. So
Oh, fabulous.
Oh, here we go. Cranberries and cheese and dairy. Ice
Can't wait.
cream.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You've been listening to Talking Trade, sponsored by MMAC's World Trade Association and Michael Best Strategies.